Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Debbie. Thank you for the invitation to come and speak today, and thank you all for turning up, which is a good start. But as Debbie said, I've got two challenges this afternoon. The first is this. I'm hoping to avoid this afternoon. I've got the first session after lunch, and the second is that I only have 20 minutes, and there's a clock down there which is telling me how much time I've got left, and it's kind of scary. So if I talk a little bit quickly, please forgive me, because I understand we need a bit of time for some questions. So what I'm going to try and talk to you about this afternoon a little bit is I promise not to try and sell you anything, because there's nothing worse than a consultant coming and trying to sell you. Just so you know, my background is mostly in corporate reward leadership roles. Myself, I was recently the head of reward for EMEA for Amazon. I've also taken some other roles, like with General Electric and with a couple of FTSE 100 companies in my time. So I know the rules about standing in front of a group of my peers. So, but what the main theme I want to talk about this afternoon is making decisions based on what you know and not what you feel. And I'm going to really relay some of my own experiences, and I hope they resonate a little bit with you. Now, why do we need to think about all of this in the context of reward? I'm sure you've been bombarded with statistics since you got here this morning, but I think this probably backs up a lot of what this said, is that one of the biggest problems that we have in the workforce at the moment is people with the wrong skills in the right places, people with the right skills in the wrong places, lack of ability to attract people into certain roles, places where we've got high unemployment but low skill level, and the opposite. So there's going to be a real battle to get the right talent in through the door. So we've got to get smarter about how we do it. Really, you know, as a summary, there's going to be 5 generations in the workforce. Well, there already are 5 generations in the workforce, and there'll be 75% of the global workforce in 5 years' time will be millennials. Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just something, you know, we've got one huge group of people born at a specific time coming into the workforce, and you know, not necessarily being able to employ everybody. We've got people at the other end of the scale delaying their retirement. Other people, it says delayed adulthood. I think that doesn't mean that you wait late until you become 21 5 years later. But what's happening is that people are making lifestyle choices later in life than they used to. So, for example, people are typically having children later in life than they would have done 50 years ago when they had them when they were 7. And we've got a lot of issues around diversification of the workforce and an aging and shrinking workforce in Europe, for example, and in Asia, a workforce that is increasingly young and self-confident. But again, that's not a bad thing, but their expectations are higher, and that is one of the things that I really want to hammer home today. Now, 40% of global employers, according to some study or other, actually it's a study that Aon did, 40% of global employers that we spoke to are concerned about a talent shortage. Now, the other 60% may also have been concerned about it, but unfortunately they had a talent shortage and they didn't have anyone to find out. But I think 40% actually may be slightly low. But the point here is that a lot of employers are thinking about where are we actually going to get people from. Now, I will come on very shortly to the crux of this discussion. Really big point here is that the employer always used to be the customer. So I don't know if you remember when you started work, if you're as old as me, you would apply for a job and you'd get a letter saying, this is what we offer, this is the deal, this is where the workplace is going to be. And you'd say, thank you very much, sir, thank you very much, thank you very much. And you would take the job. And you wouldn't necessarily consider whether reputationally it was the right company for you or other aspects of your lifestyle, whether it fitted in. Whereas now, and I'm talking, for example, giving experience from when I was at Amazon, employers are starting to consider the reputation of the employees are starting to consider the reputation of the employer much more fully than they were before. And employers can't necessarily control that reputation. We all saw recently what happened with Ryanair. It was all over the press, it was all over social media, and they lost control of their message. Employers now are having to rely far more on the anecdotal evidence that's out there in the market about whether they're good employers to work for than the message that they necessarily portray themselves. So employees are becoming much, much more savvy about where they want to work. Now, the outcome of this is that employers need to get much more savvy about attracting the right people. Now, this is my most exciting slide, so I'd like you to look at this. This is about global nuances, and really what it's showing is that what are the priorities that certain groups, this is millennials in this case, have across the world. Now, to spend time wisely with my family, it shouldn't say wisely, it should just say to spend time with my family, was the most important thing across the globe these days, followed by growing and learning new things. Having a successful career was there, living a long and healthy life is there. But the point about this slide is it's showing you that it's no longer so much the monetary stuff that matters to people. It's starting to be more, actually, I'm only here once. I want to have a good life. I want to spend time with my family. I want to do things that value. I want to have some flexibility. The really interesting thing about this slide, apart from the graphic blobs, is the fact that being wealthy is really low down on the priority list for most people in most regions. Even in North America, which surprised me, that their priorities are starting to change. Now, you might think, well, what's all this got to do with digitalization and reward, which you've actually come to talk about? But the crux of this is understanding much more deeply than we've had to before about what engages employees and what they're looking for. And then how do we actually do it? So, this is something that reward people typically say to each other or internally. We're doing the right things in reward. We've benchmarked ourselves against other companies in the market, so we know what employees should get. Now, I've said that in my time, thinking I was going to get away with it, and sometimes I did, but I realized that I probably wouldn't these days. Benchmarking ourselves against the market, yes, that's a good thing to do, but it's becoming increasingly kind of a lazy thing to do, and using that as well. Other companies do that. If you went in to see your HRD or your CEO, and you said, I've got this really good idea, I've benchmarked what other companies are going to have done, and I'm going to do that. He wouldn't think that that was, or she wouldn't think that was particularly innovative. It doesn't tell you what you really need to know. If you interpret that slide, what you could have said is, well, we tend to follow the market. We don't really consider what we may need to do to future-proof our reward strategy. We're reactive, not proactive. We buy surveys which give us historical data and do the same thing as those companies. We haven't asked our employees what matters to them, but we do have some great benefits. Having some great benefits is not necessarily the same as having the benefits that everybody else has got. More and more, we have to start thinking about what's our demographic, who are the employers that we've got, who are the people that we're trying to attract, and what matters to them. I would always start with the premise of do what is right for us as an organization. Yes, it's interesting to know what other companies are doing. Yes, it's important to be able to present that data, but don't use that data as the be-all and end-all of your strategy. Here's another one that I'd say, I've called this things that it used to be okay for the reward team to say, number 49. Don't ask me to say the other 40. I just made up the 49. But we're thinking about making changes to our reward strategy sometime in the next couple of years. We'll wait and see what others do before making a decision, but we've an HR meeting scheduled for March 2018 to start thinking about it. Again, not very proactive, but it's what we've all done. It's what we've all done historically. This thing about let's see what everybody else does, let's see what other companies are doing. Even yesterday, I had a discussion with a prospective organization that I'm going to work with who said, we'd like to know what other people are doing so we can come to a decision. The problem about that is what other people are doing, they've already started doing it. It isn't a differentiator. Employees are starting to look much more at what is actually a differentiator versus what is an expectation. So, this is my little cartoon. It says at the bottom, if you can't read it, this really is an innovative approach, but I'm afraid we can't consider it. It's never been done before. And whilst that's quite a funny little cartoon, it kind of makes the point that we have to move away as reward people from doing what we've traditionally done to being innovative. We did some research recently, or Aon did some research recently, where 70% of the companies involved with the highest levels of employee engagement were those companies that led their reward agenda. They're not the companies that were following what other organizations were doing. I always used to argue in certain corporates that I was in, somebody has to be first. If you're going to be the one that's different, be the first one to do something. It doesn't necessarily matter what it is, but be that first one. Coming on to the main crux of this, as I'm 9 minutes in, CEOs saying annoying things like this. We need evidence to show our reward strategy and future recommendations make sense, and that any investment we make will produce a positive return. The CEO of Amazon was infamous for being difficult, and he used to say to me, well, Andrew, how many people have left because we haven't got this benefit? Or how can we prove that it makes any difference whatsoever? Go away and come back when you can prove it. It's very, very data-driven organization, Amazon. Now, I couldn't prove it, I'll be honest with you. Quite a lot of the time, I would say, I think we need benefit X, Y, Z, just like a manager would say we need a new incentive plan, or a CEO would say we need a long-term incentive. But if you actually ask them to prove that it would make any difference to engagement or behavior, 99 times out of 100, they probably couldn't. So how do we actually do something about this? Here's a good one, focus groups. Focus groups are always great, aren't they? Reward and HR team have done loads of focus groups, so we have a really good insight into what employees think, and we're writing a report for the board with our new strategy recommendations. Nothing wrong with that. That's what we would all do, isn't it? Problem with focus groups, several things. One is that they don't necessarily give you good data. If you imagine we're all sitting in a room now, the focus group will tend to be dominated by the most senior person in the room, or by the person with the loudest voice, which is never me. But seriously, the focus groups, there'll be somebody scribing in the corner, they'll produce some stuff at the end of it, this is the outcome of the focus group, but it's very, very difficult to do anything meaningful with the data. It will be based on, well, who was there at the time, who turned up, what time of day it is, what mood they were in at the time. So it's quite difficult to use focus group data to get anything meaningful in a reward agenda. Now, why have I got this in here? 4 things from 1989. Oh yes, well there's a Ford Escort, which I used to have as my first company car, which is giving my age away slightly. Mine was black, by the way. Margaret Thatcher, a year before she was toppled by the men behind her, and an early mobile phone, which wasn't very mobile at all. You might be wondering, well, why on earth has he got that up there? This is the 4th thing from 1989, and that is a focus group. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with focus groups. I'm just saying that they aren't necessarily the way to get engaging data. So, how to solve the problem? Start to use digital data in various ways. Now, digital data, no one should get kind of flustered about what digital data is. We've had digital data for quite a while. You know, something on an Excel spreadsheet is digital data. It's basically putting stuff in a usable, movable, analyzable way on some kind of technology-based platform so that we can get some meaningful results out of it, rather than using bits of paper and systems that don't talk to each other, databases that don't talk to each other. So, we need to understand internal demographics, which I've already talked about, anticipate your future recruiting needs and challenges, gain insights into what employees value, and I'll come back to that, and understand what really influences engagement, and then produce compelling data-driven propositions for senior leaders, one of our biggest challenges. And then you can make your future decisions based on fact, not gut feeling, conjecture, star signs, or anything else. And then test the results. You can actually go back and test with employees whether what you've put in place works before you move on. So this slide is really seeking to show you, there are different areas of data that you can use. Your engagement data, your performance data, your internal assessment, compensation, promotion, and basic outcome data to give you a comprehensive view on what employees need going forward. So you can start to answer questions like, if you have a concern about attracting senior women into your organization, or if you have a concern about a particular employee group in, say, Germany, you can use this data to test, are my most engaged employees in Germany also my most highly paid? Or if I make certain changes to reward in a certain employee group, will it have a positive impact on engagement? Now, the other thing you'll always hear from senior people is, we don't have the budget to do anything innovative in reward. Now, that's often the case. Or you'll low down the priority list, or we'll do it next year or the year after, or when it's too late is often the case. So how do we do something about that? I don't think my thing seems to have stuck. Oh, here we are. Okay, so this slide really shows that it's understandable that you might not have the budget to do something. So if you can't invest more in total, you need to make trade-offs. But how do you know what they are? Again, the traditional approach is we all sit in a room with HR and we come up with an idea about what we'll take away and what we'll give. But what we don't do necessarily is ask the employees. Now, what we can do with some of the models that we have at Aon, sorry, I did say I wouldn't try and tell you anything, but I have to introduce that concept, is is an engagement model where you feed in the data and it will show you what the optimum point is for changing your spend or moving your spend from one place to another, increasing your level of engagement, but not necessarily increasing your overall spend. So, for example, when I was at Amazon, we looked at the life assurance premiums that we were paying in corporate offices. They ran into millions of pounds over a period of years, but the number of deaths we had internally in corporate offices was 1. So we could have self-insured that. We wouldn't self-insure necessarily in a fulfillment centre because of the relative risk, the relative danger of a large accident in a fulfillment centre, and also because reputationally it would have been a bad thing. I'm sure you've all seen panorama programmes telling you how awful Amazon was as an employer. You could choose to believe it or not. But we wanted to make sure clearly that we didn't invite people to make negative comments about us reputationally. So what we've developed really here is a methodology by which you can have a discussion internally and then take this is a little bit difficult to read, but on this left-hand side up here, it sets out what is an employer's current offering in rewards. So, for example, we will insure your employee for PMI and we'll give you 4 times salary life insurance, as an example. What we can do is think about, well, what trade-offs would we like to consider? So we might say, well, we'll insure your partner as well for PMI, but we'll knock your life assurance down to 2 times salary. And then what you can then do is ask employees what they think about that. So they're forced to make a decision, they're forced to make a trade-off between one and the other. And as a result of that, you get some meaningful data. If I can show you, there you go. Some meaningful data which you can then discuss properly with your CEO, with your HRD, with your FD around what are the areas of reward that I can change that will make a positive impact on engagement, or conversely, will have a negative impact on engagement, and what can I do to get the biggest return for the smallest investment? Because we all have assumptions about what we think employees want and what they need, but we very seldom really go out and test it and then look at it from an ROI perspective, not just financially, but from an engagement perspective as well. Because this will actually show you how the engagement needle will move. And that's meaningful data that you can have a discussion with your HRD, with your CEO, and with your FD, which I think we couldn't traditionally do. I've come to this before, but our reward strategy has an impact on the engagement of high performers. Again, does it? Do we know it does? By doing something like on the previous slide, we can actually prove whether it does, because we can drill into this data. The slide I showed you before was just a kind of overall view of how this would work. But then we can start to look, well, people at certain levels, people in certain countries, certain employee groups, men versus women, we can check to see what the engagement needle changes would be by drilling into the data. And then that informs our strategy. So I'm not saying that what we've been doing in the past is wrong. I'm simply saying that we can move on from it. We've got the external data, which I berated slightly at the beginning, but it's still important. Making sure that we understand what the priorities are of the business and engaging that with the CEO and the FD. Knowing the current spend allocation and making sure that we're getting the right return from it from an engagement and financial perspective, and making sure that we understand the typical talent, the key talent groups, and what it's going to take to retain them, or indeed to get them into the business in the first place. So, very finally, at 2 minutes, employee execution and experience as important as total reward design. How many times have we put something in place but not done the comms in the right way, not checked that it actually falls well with employees? You need a differentiator that sets you apart. I'm not sure a differentiator that wouldn't set you apart, but that was a slight tautology there, sorry. But a differentiator that sets you apart. Doing what everybody else does is fine as a check for your measure, but you need something to move your engagement needle and attract people. Your benefits need to be right before you positively impact engagement. Your decisions must be outcomes driven and aligned to business and talent strategy. It sounds obvious, but a lot of people don't do it. You need to make sure you're aligned with business, so don't have that HR meeting without checking in with business leaders and with your top guys first that it's actually going to work. Understand what makes the most difference to your critical employee groups. Ask them, find out what they think. Make sure your managers are properly trained to have the right discussions around total rewards, which is a huge challenge still in a lot of organizations. And finally, leave some slack in the project plan to allow for decision-making and surprises. Rather do something well than do something quickly. So, that was it. And I had 1 second left. I'm sorry. Sorry to rush through that, but I hope that was of some interest to you. And thank you very much for your time.
That was really interesting, and I've just got a message through on our very clever, sophisticated WhatsApp group, so I can give you an extra 2 or 3 minutes. So, if there are any questions, yes, Phil's got a question.
Yeah, really interesting, thank you. So, when you do the piece of work where you're engaging with employees about what they would prioritise in the reward package, have you ever seen that used in the next step? If there's any formal consultation required to remove or reduce benefits, that you're able to rely in any way, shape or form on that assessment that took you to that place in the first place?
Well, funnily enough, it was something I was thinking about the other day because, again, to use an Amazon example, in the highly unionised environments, exactly that point that, you know, when you're going to give something to somebody, make sure you take something away as well. That's sort of HR secret. But yeah, one of the things we always would have liked to have been able to test is, you know, what level of resistance are we going to get if we make certain changes, and how therefore do we need to manage the process? Because quite often we would over prepare for something that was actually quite well accepted, and we'd forget something that actually was going to cause a lot of grief that we didn't realise. I haven't actually used this in that context, but I can certainly see it being applicable.
Anybody else want to ask a question in a good old-fashioned put your hand up kind of way? Okay, we've got a couple of questions. Would you like to answer either of those? Money is less important, but do you think it would have rated higher if a different word to wealthy had been used? Or if all employers start with a blank piece of paper and avoid copying others, aren't we risking reinventing the wheel over and over again?
Well, that second question is actually really interesting. And I'm not saying, you know, don't copy others. What I'm saying is, you know, always be aware of what other employers are doing. But there has been a tendency in the past, and I've been guilty of it as much as the next man, of taking that data and saying, well, 65% of companies do this, therefore that's what we should do. All I'm saying as my premise is start with what is right for your organisation. Almost regardless, know what the market does, but almost regardless of that, do what is right for you. If you want to differentiate yourselves, and I'll give you an example. I worked for one organisation where it wasn't the market norm to offer private medical cover and life assurance to employees at a specific level. But we wanted to show that we were a good employer, that we cared about our employees regardless of what level they were at. We were also an egalitarian employer, and therefore we offered the same multiple of life assurance for everybody in the organisation, regardless of what the market was telling us. And we were fully cognizant of what the market was telling us. So we're not reinventing the wheel as such by doing stuff over and over again and coming up with something new. It's just that we have to start from a different premise than what the other companies are doing, was the point I was trying to make.
Brilliant. Thank you, Andrew. I'm going to draw it to a close. I believe the other two rooms have done.
Okay.
Really, really interesting. And you'll be around the rest of the day for any other questions?
I will. I'll have to think about that first question, what a different word from wealthy would be. Yeah.
Well, let's give Andrew a round of applause.
Thank you.